Good evening, everyone. You're tuned to Julia Widdop Productions of Tell Story, and we have an exciting guest tonight, so stay tuned. We'll be introducing him in just a moment. But first, I'm your hostess this evening, Dorothy Mercer of Mercer Publications and Ministries. And now without further delay, let's get to our guest this evening, Thomas Gagliano. He's going to tell us about his charming new book and the wonderful life he's led. It's just incredible. So, how are you, Tom?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, you're very welcome, and I'm delighted to have you here. So, tell us what's up.
Well, I last August came out with a book called The Problem Was Me. And I also started a new career as a life coach. I just graduated with my master's of social work from Rutgers this August. And I've really changed my life. And I'd like to go into how this all came about.
Oh, that sounds exciting. You just graduated with your master's?
Yes,
fantastic.
I did. Thank you. I'm not going to tell you it was easy. It was a journey, but I had the help of my support people, and they really carried me through it. And I'm just proud to be here in front of you, hopefully helping other people.
I understand you have quite a support group, your whole family, huh?
Oh, yeah. I have my family, and I can't say enough about the courage that they have to allow my book to come to fruition. It's a very powerful book on my life and the story of other men and women that I've helped find a better life, be the people they want to be. Yeah, to be the people they want to be in life, not the ones they were set up to be by their childhood messages. So
before you tell us how you got where you're at, tell me the name of your book and where we can find it.
The name is The Problem Was Me. You can find it at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. It's an ebook, and my website is www.thomasgagliano.com. And after we do this, anybody has any questions, please send them through. I'd love to answer any questions that pop up.
That'd be great. ThomasGagliano.com, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and where else?
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Yeah, there's bookstores all around that you could buy them at, but if you want to go to those two places, they'll have them, and they'll have them online. So.
The Problem Was Me.
Yep.
So you were the problem, huh?
Yeah. Oh, my wife loves that title, by the way. She loves the title, The Problem Was Me. You know. But it starts out really, I'll just give you a little history. As a kid, I was a legitimate victim. Things happened to me that weren't fair. I didn't deserve. But what happened is I developed this victim mentality. See, I wanted the world to pay me back for what happened as a kid. And I developed this destructive entitlement. And it took me towards addictions. It took me towards really giving myself permission to do things regardless of the harm it caused myself and others. And it got to a point that if I didn't take responsibility for what I was doing, my best thinking was going to create a very lonely, lifelong sentence in my life. I was going to push away everybody that I loved. And that's when I said, you know what, I have to start to take responsibility. And I started to go to 12-step fellowships. I was going to therapists, support groups. I went anywhere to really find out what was broken inside. And I found out that I was damaged goods. And I wasn't a bad person that deserved to be punished. I was a discouraged person that just needed help in order to find peace in my life. And about 10 years ago, I started to run groups. Well, first I spent less time in the world of business. I was always a good businessman. My father gave me those tools. My father was an addict. He had a lot of problems, a lot of addictions, and he never gave me tools on how to be a person, how to be a father, how to be a husband. I listened to Dad. I did all the things that Dad did, and So again, about 10 years ago, I started to run groups in churches, schools, in my house, free of charge, helping other people that were hurt by their childhood messages. And then I'd say about 5 years ago, a couple of therapists called me up whose clients had come to my groups and said, you know what, why don't you get your methodology out to a real broader base of individuals? The world's got to hear this. I wrote this book. Along the way, another guy introduced me to Dr. Abraham Tversky, noted psychiatrist and author himself. And he said, you got to get this book out. Clinicians need this book. People need this book. And he really pushed me to get the book out. Then I went back to school, as I said, at age 50. I got my master's of social work, and now I have intimacy groups I run out of my house. I have a group on Monday, a group on Tuesday. I do marriage counseling out of my house and individual therapy. So that's where my life has taken me to. And that's what I do now.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
I'm very impressed. So you pulled yourself up more or less by your bootstraps.
Yes, I did. And you know, ironically, my 8-year-old son explains my methodology or where it comes from better than I could. We were watching a baseball game, and he said to me, hey, Dad, how come those kids in the stands root so hard for their favorite baseball player? I said, well, those baseball players are the heroes. And he's thinking about what I said, and later he said, you know, Dad, they may be my hero someday, but you're always going to be my first hero.
Oh.
And we are. Thank you. And it was very touching, but we are our children's first heroes, whether we want that responsibility or not. You know, our childhood messages are ingrained deep in our soul. And, you know, unfortunately, a negative message in childhood will unleash a tsunami of negative voices and thoughts in our adult life. And they could sabotage the happiness we have. They affect the intimacy we have or don't have, our parenting skills, coping mechanisms. All of these things are affected by those childhood messages. And I think in life sometimes we want to deny them, repress them, we medicate them through addiction, we manipulate the truth about them, but I really believe that we pay a big price for this denial in our adult life if we don't expose these messages.
What happened to you that sort of started you thinking along these lines to save yourself?
Well, I wasn't close to my father, as I said, growing up. He was multiply addicted, and he went into the 12-step fellowship, and he went into rehabs, and he changed. He became a wonderful person to my grandchildren, wonderful. But to me, he was still a 10-foot monster. It was still a lot of time traveling I did with him about what he did to me as a kid. He abused me terribly, and one night, my mother called me up and said to me, your father's very ill. He has stomach cancer, and he doesn't have long to live. I think you should go see him. And I went to see him in the hospital that night, and I was sitting near him. And as I got up to leave, we were talking, you know, and he was very gaunt. You know, the cancer had spread all over. And as I went to leave the room, he said, sit down a minute, I want to tell you something. He said, you know, I was sitting where you were sitting 20 years ago. He says, and my father was dying of lung cancer. He said, I could never tell my father how I felt. I could never tell him I loved him. He says, and I don't want that to happen to you. And he really saw the pain I was in, even through his pain. And I still couldn't say anything to him. You know, I grew up that kids don't cry, men don't cry. You know, a lot of really destructive messages. As I left the room, I went to take his hand and say goodbye, and he grabbed a hold of me, he pulled himself towards me, and he started to cry. And as he started to cry, I was very uncomfortable. Again, intimacy was something I was going to avoid my whole life. You know, I learned as a kid that intimacy was painful and fearful, another destructive message, and I wasn't going to let anybody get close to me. And I wanted to run out of that hospital room. I only saw my father cry when I was a kid, when he would beat me up, and he then, in a drunken stoop, and then he would say, I'm sorry, please forgive me. That's the only other time I saw my father show emotion. In this day in the hospital, he was very sincere about what he said to me, and I left the hospital room, and shortly after he died, and one day, my mother had given me a cookbook. He used to write his recipes on this cookbook he had. He used to make these like 5-pound cream puffs, you know. And on the opposite side of the book, he would do his journaling. He journaled his feelings. And I started to read his journaling one day, and this was after he passed away, and I saw how very afraid he was, and how I really was able to feel the pain that he was in, and I realized that this wasn't a 10-foot monster. This was a man like myself. He could have been me, I could have been him. We were the same, sharing his pain on paper. And I really started to find compassion for himself, and I have to tell you, one of the most important things is to find compassion for yourself. You know, when you are a recovering addict and you've done a lot of things, if you don't find compassion for yourself, you will not allow any love into your life. You won't allow the love of your wife, of your children in. And I realized that that day I was going to help people find compassion for themselves, to start to love themselves again. And that's what I do with my methodology. And that really is what changed me and allowed me to develop these techniques to help other people really find compassion for themselves. See, I believe that without that, an inner critic develops in our thinking. And this inner critic is that little voice that constantly tells us what we're doing wrong, never allowing us to celebrate our victories, never. And if we don't expose this inner critic, we just will never find serenity in our lives. We'll never find intimacy in our life. If this inner critic tells us that intimacy is painful and fearful, don't let anybody near you, well, we're going to sabotage intimacy every time it comes our way. And again, it starts with, in the name of my book, the problem was me. I have to start with knowing that I have to take the responsibility for what happened. And that's how I got into some of the methodology that I use.
So did you ever reach a point where you forgave your father?
Absolutely. I think that cookbook that he wrote, I saw him, I right-sized him. I saw him as a man that was in pain, not a man looking to hurt me. See, I realized at that time, you know, it wasn't personal. It wasn't trying to hurt me. He was just had his own inner pain. And I think that allowed me to find compassion for myself.
I'm sure there are a lot of other people listening out there that have had similar problems. This is a universal problem. Do you have any suggestions for people like that?
Yeah, I think I could make this more universal by saying that it's not just about addictions, my book. You know, that inner critic I talk about, he imprisons us to play roles in our lives, roles that we don't want to play. How many of your listeners out there play the role of the caretaker, where they carry the world on their shoulder, but they don't know how to put it down? How many people out there are people pleasers, where they say yes all the time because it's too painful to say no?
Yeah.
How many of them play an invisible role in their relationships, where they just shut down and disappear?
Yeah.
How many of them play the victim role, where they want to blame everybody for their problems? Or the defiant role, where you say this, I say that. I'm going to do the opposite of what you tell me. So my book is really not just about addictions. It's about how this warden that's the inner critic. That's the name I gave him. How this warden imprisons us to play these roles we don't want to play, roles that sabotage our happiness, but we don't know how to get out of them. Well, I have 3 essentials on how to break these roles. One is awareness. You have to know what's broken inside in order to know what has to be fixed. You got to expose this inner critic, these messages that you received. We time travel at times, where we allow the voices of our past to become the voices in our present life. And we got to be able to see that, to see how this distorted thinking we have really affects our life. And the next essential is actions. We have to change the actions that we're taking. Through awareness, we become aware of how to take different actions. Uncomfortable actions at first, until they become comfortable actions. These actions, when we're changing our role, we're going to have to do things we don't want to do, like say no when we want to say yes. And then the third essential is maintenance, maintaining these actions. So in a nutshell, without awareness, we don't know what actions to take. And without actions, there's nothing to maintain. That warden will be back again to tell us what to do if we're not maintaining these different actions.
Fascinating, Tom. Just fascinating. I'm sure there are a lot of people eager to pick up your book and get help for themselves. What sorts of people would you say would benefit from your book?
Well, I think my book can serve as a blueprint to give our children some of the healthy and loving messages that might have been denied to us. So I think it can help a lot of parents. The message, for instance, that you could make a mistake in life doesn't mean you are a mistake. You can fail at times, doesn't mean you are a failure. Huge messages to give our children. If we don't, we negate a part of their humanness, compassion for themselves.
Parents.
Yeah, right? I think
and
absolutely.
Others? Any others?
I think it'll help many of us who have loved ones that sabotage their happiness in their life. It'll bring an understanding as to why they do what they do. And I think it'll help anybody. We all have an inner critic to some extent. Some more severe than others, but all of us do. And if anybody wants to silence that inner critic and stop listening to its commands and find a better life, my book is going to help you. The problem was me. It will help you.
If people are interested in working with you one-on-one as therapy, do you take people into your classes or do counseling or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I do individual, I do marriage, and I also, like I said, I have groups for intimacy. We don't realize in life how much we are afraid of intimacy. I mean, if we didn't see it as a kid, we're not going to allow it in as an adult. And that's what my groups are predicated on. So anybody could contact me, again, on my website, www.thomasgagliano.com. And we could talk a little bit, and I would love to help if I can help. If what I've spoke about sounds interesting, give me a shot.
You're more or less on the East Coast?
Yeah, I'm in New Jersey, right.
In New Jersey. Okay, Thomas Gagliano, GAGLIANO.com, and his new book, The Problem Was Me, available in all your favorite places. Well, Thomas, do you have any last words before we sign off? Yeah,
just as I said before, are you doing what you want to do in life? Are you the person you want to be, or are you imprisoned by the messages you received in childhood? That's the whole question, and you have to answer that. And if you want to break those roles and silence that inner critic, my book will help you. Thank you.
Very well said. And thank you very much, Tom. I found this so interesting. It was a joy to have you today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, and goodbye. We'll see you again soon.